Hey, what's going on? This is the OG Kickoff. I am Connor O'Gara. Subscribe to the OG Kickoff on YouTube. Will, it just meant more. We have a doozy of a game today, just in terms of storylines. We are doing the 2009 SEC Championship, a game in which we somehow have not done. Number 1, Florida. Number 2, Alabama. Will, you could make the case that while this game is a dud in terms of late game intrigue, this does not have the same sort of late game intrigue that last week's game did with the Ole Miss, Tennessee, Lane Kiffin reunion and Knoxville game. This is one of the single most, you know what, I'm just going to say it. It is the single most important passing of the torch game in college football in the 21st century. Fair or not?
I very much agree. And we'll get into this as far as what the future could have held for Urban Meyer and all of that. But yeah, I mean, I think this was truly the birth of joyless murder ball, right? So when people are saying, hey, we want to return to joyless murder ball, hashtag joyless murder ball, we just beat you by 9 points. No. Joyless murder ball is like the fourth quarter of a game is academic because we are physically destroying an undefeated returning national champion with like a Heisman winner, with a Hall of Fame head coach. That is joyless murder ball. That you're exactly right. This was a very bleak game at the end. It was like watching a war documentary.
Alabama took Florida's soul. They took all of Florida's superpowers, not full Monstars, but basically at certain points, that's what it felt like. And we have a decade and a half of history since that game to back up the fact that this was a passing of the torch game. It felt like it at the time, given all the talent that Florida was going to lose to the NFL draft, most notably one Tim Tebow, who, Will, if you're watching this on YouTube, this game was in fact the Tebow Tears game. And that's probably the way that most people remember this game. And if you go on YouTube and try and watch the full version of it, go to that second comment. Yeah, everyone's just here for the Tebow Tears. That's probably really the intrigue of watching all 4 quarters of this game, because with 62 seconds left in this game, one Tim Tebow cried on national television, and he's going to be hearing about it for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I'm going to try to, get us a new, fresh background for each and every one of these. I think that this was just an iconic image in SEC history. I'm going to ask you a question here, Connor.
Yes.
Who do you think America was rooting for in this game?
I was going to ask you, as
Too late.
as an LSU fan, who was Will Ogburn rooting for as someone who went to Hoover High in Alabama, had all the reason in the world to root against Nick Saban, also had all the reason in the world to root against Florida?
Oh, I mean, I was rooting for Florida all day. And I've said, the 2007 team has my heart for LSU, but the preceding 2008 and then 2009 Florida teams were kind of my fix on football when LSU was not as good, right? And I mean, the way they played, the way they were physical, the way they looked cool, the way they had these speedsters, and I made this point whenever we looked at Swamp Kings, that's the standard that I will always hold the Florida Gators to. And that's why sometimes I'll get into it with Florida fans, because same deal as the Bama standard. It's like, this is what I remember. I remember this dynasty of Florida where they were just so unstoppable until this day in December.
It really was the death of the Florida dynasty and the beginning of the Alabama dynasty, because go back and tell someone in 2009, going into this game on December 5th, 2009, that Florida would never get this close to a national title in these 16 seasons that followed. This was a playoff semifinal game, a de facto playoff semifinal game, with the winner knowing that they were going to be playing in the BCS championship game. Turned out to be against Texas, of course, who still had to play in the Big 12 championship against Nebraska that night, something that we'll circle back to in a minute here. And go tell someone on the Alabama side, maybe a young Chris Marler who sold his 96 Buick to be able to go to this football game. Go back and tell him that Alabama was about to play in 9 national championship games from 2009 to 2021, and that Bama would win 6 rings. Those two things, that is the ultimate passing of the torch. Florida gave its superpower. You know what? That's the wrong verb. Nothing about this was just a here you go. Alabama took Florida superpower and then harnessed it for more than a decade.
You know what I didn't see in the crowd at all, Connor? Smirks on Bama fans. It was such a wild thing to see Bama fans looking like fresh new faces, seeing the unbridled joy in their faces to say, oh my God, we are for real. maybe I had some questions. We lost this game in the fourth quarter last year.
Yep.
Maybe Florida was kind of the big dog in the SEC, and you see these new Bama fans feeling unbridled joy. Again, at the time, I couldn't have been more furious. But looking back, it's like I'm sure those fans could go back, wish they could go back to that moment in time and feel this win for the first time. Because I would argue, and again, the OG kickoff at gmail.com, sound off, is this the most joy as a Bama fan? Because this really felt like breaking through. And the first time you do that is so much more impressive, I think, than the next. Or, championships never get old, folks. But the first one and really feeling like you can be a championship team is nothing sweeter.
Nobody forgets their first time. I was going to ask you, do you think this is as happy as Nick Saban has ever been? Because 2018 SEC championship kind of comes close. The comeback against Georgia, where ironically enough, Jalen Hurts replaces Tua, and Saban is just so emotional that game. But I was thinking about it with the smile on his face. He's doing the chest bump with Mark Ingram after winning this game, and Saban doesn't have the look of someone who is just nitpicking the little things and frustrated. Now, he still gives you an all right here or there in the press conference, or not in the press conference, but in the sideline interview with Tracy Wolfson going into this one. But is this as happy as you will see Nick Saban on the sideline of an organized tackle football game?
I think so too. And I think that you can see how jaded he kind of became by the end, where in the end, he had his little like note card of all the points about our strength of schedule, our FPI, our PFF grade, try to like impress the committee. And at the end of this game, they ask him, hey, is Mark Ingram the Heisman winner? And he's just like, he's a great player on a great team. Like you could just see him so excited, like he didn't know what to say. And again, unbridled joy, like he had been there before. But we've talked about the journey of Nick Saban, leaving LSU, going to the Dolphins, failing, coming back to, the cheers of Bama fans, but the boos from LSU and other places, and seeing that moment of like, okay, wow, like this is actually kind of working for me. And so, yeah, I think that he was, how about this? Maybe not joy, because he was saying joy, but off script. I think it's the most off script, unprepared Nick Saban we've seen.
I think so too. And it makes sense if you understand his career and understand what is the type of thing, what is the type of performance that can get him to those places of that joy. And I think we saw that play out. This game has such massive buildup. You talk about it being a rematch. It was the first ever SEC championship between undefeated teams. Florida never had the undefeated season. Are they going to be able to do it? Are they going to win 3 and 4? Florida had won 22 consecutive games since the promise, which was September of the previous season against Ole Miss. And that included, of course, the previous year's SEC championship against Bama. And you get this elite open with Spurrier and Stallings. You're going back and looking at the history of the SEC championship, which was, of course, these two programs at the forefront of it. I did have a brief thought. This is such a buzzkill thought, Will. They mentioned, and if you've ever seen, there's a great SEC story on the history of the SEC championship, how rogue of an idea it felt like at the time, and everybody's saying you're going to cannibalize your league. I did have the thought, Will, if they didn't have the SEC championship, these two teams would have played for a national championship. And so there was a little bit of the skepticism, but at the same time, you get to market it as this championship between your league that felt like a national championship. And that's probably why I don't think that was a major talking point and why people are like, oh, see, the SEC is dumb. This is because this is at a time where not everybody's having conference championship games. Like the Pac-12, maybe the Pac-12 did have a championship game, but it wasn't necessarily a time where that was a thing. Big Ten did not have a conference championship game. And so it was still seen as kind of this, like, should we, shouldn't we? And if the SEC hadn't, this would have been a year in which you would have had Florida and Alabama playing in the national championship. Instead, they get to decide it in the game before in the SEC championship, which is a semifinal.
I'm with you. And hey, it's time for us to just sound like boomers here, because the sport used to be a little bit better, I think. And this is a good like follow-up point to that, right? There was a point in this broadcast where, I believe it was Gary, said, both teams can go 12-0. And if they don't win game 13, it ain't going to matter much for these two teams. And like, how far removed are we from that moment when you get two 12-0 Hall of Fame coaches, Heisman quarterback, Heisman running back, and they're sitting there going, we lose this game, our lives are pointless. Like, why are we doing any of this? And exactly what you said, like, that's the old way of thinking of play the game. Play the game. We got a conference. We got an East and a West. We got to see who's better for pride, not just for the national spotlight or for the money or for all that, but we've been looking at that team from across the room all year since last year. Let's lace them up and go beat their butts. And I think that was the era we were in.
And both teams had already clinched the divisions well in advance. So you had that build up too. It was back at the time in which you could theoretically clinch a division title in early November and know who you're going to be playing in the SEC championship. Now, still would benefit you most to be able to get there unscathed, but there was a really good chance that this was going to end up being this type of matchup. And it delivered with the build up and the storylines, but the game itself, yeah, like it's, it is what it is. Will, we're adding 2 new categories per your request. I love these categories. We've kind of done these accidentally at times, but you know what? We need to just add them to part of the regular It Just Meant More rotation. Let's start with where we were for this game. This is 2009, December of 2009. Where was a young Will Ogburn watching this football game?
Well, I went through kind of my social media history back then, and I stumbled upon
Oh
a little
boy,
gem.
wait. Social media history in 2009 is like real early.
It was I had joined Facebook that year, right? And so, I thought I was going to see a lot of sad posting. What I saw was a hilarious quote by me. I was just on there talking about music. I was hyping up some Coheed and Cambria. I was trying to talk about anything but this game. I had one football comment. It was about Arkansas's kicking game to my buddy who was an Arkansas fan. This is how you know I was coping in the middle of this game. I was not talking smack. I was not sad visibly. I was talking about anything but this game. And I'm going to add another little depth of context. I'll tell you where I was a couple days before. Connor, what does the phrase GTL mean to you?
Gym tan laundry.
Of course you're in on this. Okay, 2 days before this game, the premiere of Jersey Shore.
2 days before? Oh, not season 1 though, right?
Season 1. Season 2 is where the big hype happened, but season 1 premiered 2 days before this game.
Wait a minute. I knew the phrase gym tan laundry like freshman year of college. Freshman year of college for me was 2008.
You might have invented it then.
I felt like I had heard that before. Maybe I hadn't. Maybe this was okay. I stand corrected on that.
Yeah, man. So that's exactly kind of like where I was at. I was in high school talking about sports, excited to hang out with my friends, listen to some bands, watching some Jersey Shore. I started to read the entire text message, the famous one that started off that series, but I realized that's a little bit too raunchy for our airwaves. But that's where we were at. We were just getting our GTL on back then, brother.
All right. I was at a very different place, Will. Beer Olympics, 2009, at an undisclosed location in South Bloomington, Indiana. No, we did not win Beer Olympics that day. And everybody was thinking it. Yeah, because look, we had good times on Saturdays in the fall, and I was not sober the first time that I watched this game. Very far from it, but it was a game that was definitely on. And I remember having so many conversations about this game that day. And I remembered this well because myself, one of my former college roommates, we loved watching Florida. Like we made it appointment viewing to watch Florida Saturday on CBS. Like that was like our go-to thing. And these Florida teams were very polarizing for a lot of people. My older fraternity brothers who were there at Beer Olympics that day did not like Florida, and they did not like specifically Tebow. And they wanted so badly to watch Alabama throttle Florida, and boy, did they. So the frustration that I felt, not just because I was not on my beer pong skills that day, could have been better. Flip Cup didn't exactly go well. Louisville Chugger, that was a game back in the day too. If you know, you know. I also had this frustration of feeling like, oh man, I talked smack on behalf of Florida fans, which again, I wasn't like a true Florida fan. I liked that era of Florida football. I loved watching Tebow. And
dude, the jerseys were dope. I remember like they almost had like the Oregon feathers on one of their jerseys. Like again, Tebow was like, we could say it now. Tebow was a culture warrior back in the day. Like if you were a down home Southern, like you really cannot overstate. I know you were in the North, but like the amount, like the grip that Tebow had on like kind of Southern culture and moms and stuff, where if you were religious, you went to church. Hey, if you do stuff the right way, if you eat your vegetables, you can grow up and be like Tim Tebow, you know?
So that jersey with the feathers on it. My guy Chris Stoney, who went to Florida, was with our company, you know Stoney. He had a hookup at Nike, and he gave me that Tebow jersey back in 2015.
Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah, like not a game worn or anything like that, but it was a blue Tebow jersey.
Do you still have this? Where was this for the jersey contest? That might have won.
So here's the other part of the
Oh
story.
no.
I realized doing this job, I'm like, look, I love Tebow. I think I've been fortunate enough to like have our paths cross a few times. Like that's really cool for me personally. I also realized there's never going to be a situation in which I'm going to wear this jersey. So I gave this jersey to one of my Florida buddies, my guy Drew, who like Drew like will take me, like I've been to, a Florida basketball game with him and sat like right behind. I went to when Florida played Auburn a few years ago, and I sat like right behind the Auburn bench. It was Jabari Smith, like that team. So it was like a really good Auburn team. Walker Kessler, and got to get spit on by Bruce Pearl. Not really, but basically. And so like that day, he was taking me to go to this game, and I'm like, I'm going to show up with the TiVo jersey for him because he's somebody that can actually appreciate it. Whereas I'm realizing as I've had this jersey now at that point for 6+ years, I haven't been in situations where I've worn this. And if I ever get seen wearing this, people are just going to be like, oh my God, like you're just like some Florida homer or something like that. And I'm really like not. I think everybody that's listening to this knows that, I've been able to kind of look at Florida objectively. But that is what happened to that Florida jersey that I once owned. And I found a better home for it. I think I found a better home for it, and I feel okay about that.
Well, there might be one perfect opportunity to wear that. That's, of course, if you interview John Parker Wilson one day.
I think I reached out to him a long time ago and didn't hear anything back. I don't know what he's up to.
Hoover legend. And do you
Yeah.
remember my story with my mom talking to him in the airport and kind of talking smack to him?
I don't remember that.
Oh, okay. So this was after the 2008 game. I guess the Bama team plane was getting in. This is a couple weeks after we were probably flying out of like Birmingham, Shuttlesworth, or whatever when I lived there. And the Bama team was there, and my mom, of course, never shy, sees John Parker, walks up to him and goes, "Hey, maybe you should have written something different on your eye black like Tebow did. You would have beat him." And he's like, "Thank you, ma'am. Go Bucks. Have a great day."
That's what she said to him? That's worse than the woman coming up to me in the parking lot saying, "Oh, you're a ginger." That's so much worse, Will.
Eye black critique was not, he didn't have a comeback for it. He was just like, so that's how, like, we were back in the day listening to WJOX every day, going to school, praying on Alabama's downfall, and realizing, like I told you in this moment, that it wasn't going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of what we were listening to, another new category here. The number one song in America, December 5th, 2009. Will, do you have any guesses?
I also looked this up. I'll let you hit it.
Okay. Empire State of Mind.
Oh, yes. A
Jay-Z.
Classic, man. An absolute
Keys.
classic. That was 20 years ago, man.
Dude, that is stunning to think about. It really is. This is the most 2009 song imaginable. A rare song that I personally avoided like the plague when it first came out, and now I love it. And here's why. I hated it, and this is going to sound really weird. If you this explaining this dynamic is not going to make sense, but just trust me on this. Where I lived in this apartment complex in 2009, I'm a sophomore at Indiana. There were a ton of New York natives, a lot of New York people go to Indiana. And there were certain apartments, including mine, that faced inward to the courtyard, and it echoed like crazy. So at all hours of the night,
That was like the Rocky Top.
Oh my God, Will, 2009 burned into my brain. Just
New
echoing.
York every 5 seconds.
It was Concrete Jungle. Oh my gosh. I used to hear this
student
song.
housing. This is not New York. This is not a jungle. This is a suburb to New York.
We are in Bloomington, Indiana. Might I
Brother,
remind
you're
you?
in Bloomington, Indiana. What are you talking about?
Look, I'm happy that you're getting after it at 1 a.m. on a Tuesday night. Your boy needs to get some shut-eye. And that's at a time in my life.
He never sleeps, baby.
That's at a time in my life where, look, I was getting after it pretty good. I already told you about Beer Olympics, all right? I was more okay with that type of crowd and that type of atmosphere, but they'd always have the windows open and they'd always be blasting that song. So I hated that song when it came out. If it had come out probably like 2 years later, it's, probably one of my favorite songs of college. Instead, just wrong place, wrong time. Great song now when it comes on the radio. Come on. I mean, everybody's listening to it. It's a banger.
Absolutely. Yeah. All-time song. You know what else came out around that time? The Blind Side.
It did, Will. It did. You know, and it feels earlier because of the coaches that are a part of this, of Michael Orr's story, but you're right, it did come out. It was what was it? Because it was, like, fall of 2009, if I'm not mistaken?
Literally right before then too, man. This is like a 2009 blast because this was November 20th of 2009. So we had that Jersey Shore, and then this game was just peak post 2010 era.
Wow. America having a moment in 2009. What a way to end the decade it was. Alright, the directors. Nick Saban. Might have heard of him. This is a huge inflection point in Nick Saban's career. It's year 3 at Bama. We know that it's a revenge game after his team lost to Florida, 2008 SEC championship, of course. Also, to this point, Saban has never done the thing that I think is most impressive about his legacy. It's something that is so hard to get to this level, and it's truly what separates the great coaches from the all-time coaches. That is, be a preseason top 5 team who finishes as a top 5 team. To that point, 2009 Alabama was his second ever preseason top 5 squad, the first of which was 2004 LSU, which lost 3 games, prompted Saban's move to the NFL. You know how that played out. I don't need to remind you of that. It wasn't until Saban's 14th season as an FBS head coach in which he started and finished as a top 5 team. And then he would go on to do that 11 times at Bama. But Saban gets to play the underdog card in this one. And it's, you know, probably the last time that he ever really gets to play that in such an obvious way, where Bama was like a 5-point underdog in this one. And Buddy was that easy to forget after the way that Bama came out, set the tone for not just this day, but really the decade plus that would follow.
Yeah, and that's what really gets lost in this is in the Swamp Kings documentary did shed some light onto this, but it's like I feel like they didn't honestly do a good enough job of portraying Florida as scary and dominant as they were. It was like they almost tried to make them relatable in the Swamp Kings documentary. No, no, this is a team that easily won with the 2 quarterback system in 2006. And Tim Tebow was like kind of the child that was promised. He was between a couple of schools, Bama being one of them. He wins the Heisman in '07. The supporting cast kind of lets him down. And then boom, '08, shot out of a cannon speech. We're here in '09. And again, he comes back. I believe it was him and Percy Harvin that came back after '08.
Not Harvin. Harvin was off to the NFL.
Not Harvin. There was another dude that was
Brandon Spikes came back. They had their entire 2 deep. Their entire 2 deep from their defense came back.
Yep, Percy Harvin wasn't in this game. Duh. Yeah, it was like you're right, Spikes on the defense that came back. And so it was like, okay, boom, they're the empire. So what we think of Alabama is now, that's what they were at this point in time. And like I never do the poor little Alabama. In this exact moment, it was poor little Alabama.
Yeah, and Saban knew it. Very much knew the context of it, knew what he was going up against. And, it is kind of interesting to think about how much Saban really had to play into that. I think it was so important for this game. Like, I don't think this is one of those games in which you could truly tell your team, oh, ignore all the outside noise, like play your game, blah, blah. No. Know that these guys they could sell. They took something from you last year. This is the standard. You want to be the standard. You want to be the reason that Alabama football is back. You need to go out and win a game like this. And buddy, it was belt to you know what.
Absolutely. And the weird season for Alabama was the year before, where they were shot out of a cannon and started undefeated. I remember that really being like, whoa.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and again, this was kind of the last line of defense. Like, well, you still got to beat Tebow.
Let's get to Urban here. If you want a drinking game for this one, really any game that 2009 season, drink every time that Urban is shown on the sideline looking like he's about to either have a heart attack or lose his lunch or both. Because
he may not have been lying. That was kind of my takeaway from this game is he might have had health issues if he had stayed at Florida and kept going through this, because that sideline interview, he was like twitching, man.
Yeah, I've never seen a guy with shorter hair run his hands through his hair as often as Urban did. Like, it's so bad. And our guy Pat Dooley talked about it in Swamp Kings. Like, he had never seen a team look so miserable while undefeated. And Urban's a big part of that. I mean, he just is. Given the point of his life that he was at, you could bet that Urban probably wished that he could just play this game. This is the point in his life where he says he was taking 2 Ambien a night and washing it down with a beer just to get 4 hours of sleep. this is the Urban Meyer that we saw on that sideline. And I want, not saying that I'm like rooting for a statistical breakdown when Urban dies, but if and when that day comes, I want the statistical breakdown to know how much these games aged him. Really just his time at Florida, because he turned into a silver fox in a hurry, and I don't think that was just a byproduct of hair dye. There might not ever be a coach that I've ever seen who carried the weight of raised expectations more than Urban. We talk about like Saban's demeanor on the sideline, all that stuff, but he eventually hit a point where that was just his default. Urban was strictly pain, and it was nothing else. Like Saban, it was, hey, this guy's out of the, like this guy's doing the wrong thing. I can kind of like let my emotion show. Urban just looked like he was being tortured the entire time football was happening. His really good football team was playing. And it's kind of wild. Like, think of coaches like Kirby or, Dan Hurley or add Saban to that, of course. Did they look as pained in their pursuit of a third title as Urban did? I don't think so.
No, I mean, he is one of the most fascinating people, maybe the most fascinating coach in college football history. And I don't really know if we have the ability to truly profile him in a way that will answer the questions I really have about him, because he's just so different from every head coach. He almost gives me like Patrick Bateman, American Psycho vibes, like where you could just see he's so zeroed in. Every coach is zeroed in. He doesn't have like the humanizing relatability factor. It feels like he was created by AI. It feels like every day he truly had a singular focus. Like he listened to all the coaching tapes where like all that matters is winning, and he just played them on repeat. And every day that wasn't exactly like that freaked him out. And so the stuff that keeps like a Nick Saban or Kirby Smart grounded, when you see them kind of laughing in the press comments or finding joy in the little things, he was like, had none of that. It was like winning didn't make him happy, which is true for some coaches. It was almost like he was being chased by a dragon, and winning was the food he was giving it. And he had to pay that price every day. And the days he didn't, it ate him.
Christian Bale is definitely going to play Urban in the biopic. You just nailed that. That makes a lot of sense now that I think about it. Yeah. Gosh, that's a match made in heaven. You're right, though. And the more I look back on those games, the more I realize how obvious it was that he was about to crash out. And as we know, 3 weeks after this game, he announced he was resigning. Then it turns into this indefinite leave of absence. He's talked back into staying, and it's one more season, a failed 2010 season. 362 days after this game, he announced that he was done for real at Florida. And it was one of these things that you're like, man, you're seeing the end of Urban at Florida play out in real time in ways that I just don't think that you could have ever truly expected for someone that had achieved so much success. 2 losses in these previous 2 seasons in 08 and 09, and still he was driven to that point. And it's why, as we'll get to later with what would have happened if the result was flipped, why I don't know that Urban's story changes that much with a win or a loss.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is like he was almost like on this Kirby Smart path where he was so early, he was so young, he did all this great stuff at Utah, at Bowling Green, whatever. And now looking at what Nick Saban has done, you have to have kind of like a really specific type of career to even be in like the theoretical growth conversation, which you have to win very early, very young. Like you have to get way ahead of Nick Saban because nobody ages like Nick Saban. And looking back, it was like, especially after the Ohio State title, it was like, wow, this guy like kind of has that weird resume where he's won at a couple of places, he's doing all this, but I think he used all of his juice, all of his talent points in the Florida run, recharge, then at the Ohio State run. We saw he had nothing for Jacksonville. And so it's almost like he was living every day like he did 48 hours or something, and it was just not sustainable. And that's why he saw that success so early.
The A-listers, Will. We've got plenty. My God, do we have plenty. Let's start with Tebow. Larger than life at this point. You mentioned earlier, social media, early stages of it, but smartphones obviously not mainstream yet. Tebow in some ways kind of feels like one of the last monoculture staples of college football. Johnny Manziel's fame was ignited because of the internet, and Tebow at that time was still considered this universal turn on TV, everybody knows who he is type of star just because of who he was on TV and not necessarily anywhere else. But man, at a time when you couldn't watch every college football game on TV, you could very often find Tebow on, and you could make the determination for yourself whether or not you liked him or hated him. And at the very least, you consumed him. You could not make the decision at that point in time to just opt out of Tebow coverage. It was everywhere. And I've always pushed back on people who say that they hated Tebow by saying, okay, do you actually dislike him? Or do you just like do you dislike the way that he was covered in the media? Because those are two entirely different things, entirely different conversations. And more times than not, everybody's like, oh yeah, I just hate the coverage. Like Tebow seems, like if the world had more Tim Tebow, the world would be a better place. That's what I've always said. And I've always loved Tebow because his game, while imperfect, was just so inspiring. I think anybody, whether you rooted for him or against him, could see that. And the lefty thing was cool. The power, the determination that he ran with, everybody knows all that stuff. But him becoming this college football god was this lightning rod of conversation at that time. And in a lot of ways, I think he was kind of like college football's Christian Laettner, get on the field with that guy, see what his power is actually like, and then you'll have a new appreciation for him. And I'm not saying that they conducted themselves in the same sort of way or anything like that, but it was just an impossible subject at that point to be neutral on. Will, did you find yourself as a Tebow defender at that time, even as an LSU fan?
Yeah, absolutely. And, like I was saying, I really rooted for them. And there's, I think that monoculture thing about Tim Tebow is such a great point, right? And I will now move to another point, which is that I feel like I was so young and naive at the time. And I mean, 2 months after this, man, was that Focus on the Family Tim Tebow Super Bowl commercial.
I forgot about that.
I mean, this was right then. And so, like, even like today with, the platforms athletes have and the activism they do, something like that would be so out of left field because we'd be like, oh, you're pandering to this side, not this side. Where's the bipartisanship? I remember being like a religious kid growing up and being like, wow, like, this is so cool. He's this great player. He's on this great team. Florida seemed like a cool moral team to me when I was, in ninth grade. And then you see the commercial during the Saints Super Bowl. And I'm like, wow, like this all just seems so easy. It seems so pure. And I think that goes into, what your heroes can be turned into, how they can be messengers. Because exactly to your point, Tim Tebow has completely, to my understanding, kept his nose clean, right? Like, I don't think he's been part of any of these scandals. And it just shows how people can be pulled in all these different directions by the media, by people around them, when really he just wanted to praise God, play football. He got turned into all these different things by all these different people. And again, the commercial was his choice, right? He didn't have to do that. But outside of that, I don't even think he made the choice to do any of this stuff to be covered the way he was.
That's the thing that I think is hard for people to wrap their head around. They want Tebow and his message to be fraudulent. If Tebow was a fraud at this point, if he was just doing this to like gain fame and notoriety, he would have been exposed a long time ago. Dude's 39. He's been doing this for a long time. And, I think that there are certain people that have always wanted that scandal to come out and just make it seem like, oh, he wasn't worthy of that type of coverage. I'm not saying like he was worthy of all the coverage, because the coverage, especially once he got to the Broncos, was nauseating, and it was ridiculous, and you tried to avoid it. But I do think that there is a certain level of satisfaction that Tebow should have looking back on his career and his life in the spotlight, knowing that the worst things that you can actually say about him are that he cried at the end of this devastating loss. Like that's really, I mean, that's kind of the biggest knock against him. And he didn't go out the way that he hoped to. He didn't have the NFL career that he hoped to, but like, I don't know. I think he's a really tough guy to poke holes in, even if you kind of don't like his message and don't like what he's about.
I think you're right. And just to like put a bow on that, it's almost like the people that hated him were just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for him to be some kind of a weirdo. Enough time has passed that I think we could kind of say he wasn't, especially at that time. So yeah, weirdly, he's the one guy that felt the most, like kind of propped up, and he's been the most moral of almost anyone here.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely some issues with some of these guys on this list. Brandon Spikes, another A-lister at this point. I used to play NCAA 09, and I loved being Brandon Spikes on defense. It was so fun. I probably rushed the passer too much. I can admit that. But he was just like the perfect defensive player to be, because he never missed on those open field tackles. You could blow up plays. Occasionally, you slip into coverage and pick one off. Yeah. If you've seen Swamp Kings, also that in addition to being the perfect video game player at that time, he's also kind of the perfect illustration of the urban era, and a guy that wasn't really bought in as much early on in his career, did not want to have the midnight workout sessions and do all that stuff, like wanted to just show up to school, have a good time, and wanted to just rely on his raw ability. He always says, like, I became a man at Florida, and he bought in. And when he bought in, it was a sight to see. And also maybe kind of a microcosm of this game in some ways, because Florida had these rare defensive issues, even though he was leading the number one defense in the country. And he was not at 100% in this game. You could see him kind of, laboring at certain points. He had like a couple missed tackles. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't get held on the long Mark Ingram screen pass, whatever the case may be. He was not at peak form in this game, and neither was Florida. I don't know that peak Brandon Spikes would have been able to save Florida on this day.
And a lot of guys went out in this game too. And I think that just goes to show, if you have 4 years of midnight workouts and guys, quads exploding and stuff, like once you get to the end of that, you're playing deep into the postseason like this. Like that just kept happening. Guys were like kind of coming off the field with like nagging injuries.
Major Wright was another one. And I'm including him on this list of A-listers because if I don't, I'm afraid that he will drop an Oklahoma hit on me while I'm mowing my lawn or something. I know he had a nice NFL career. I loved him on the Bears. He was great. But he could have started an app on his own called Oklahoma Drilled. And instead of it being like Cameo, where it's like, oh, here's a shout out, from this celebrity or whatever, he just goes to places and tackles you like that hit in the national championship the previous year. Like I saw the ball. I wanted him. The bar of all bars in the history of defensive backs in college football. Maybe the last time safeties were allowed to be safeties in college football.
Yeah, that's another this is the exact moment, man, where so many things changed. Because that type of player, great example, Mark Barron got moved to linebacker. Like in his NFL career, because you just couldn't be that as a safety. Just your main skill being knock the mess out of that dude. Aaron
Hernandez, the best tight end in college football in 2009, and then he was never to be heard from again.
Mark Ingram. We can just move on from that. But a guy that, I've listened to a lot of stuff about Hernandez. Fascinating guy to me.
R.I.P.
And, another guy that you can kind of see the looks in his face and see, knowing the amount of, substances that people were saying he was on right then, the amount of turmoil he was going through in his life, the amount of just like kind of conflicting emotions he had. And you can kind of see like how a lack of success and therefore failure was hitting all of these guys at once, for some of them the first time. And he was one of those guys where it's like, this has been a first down for me my whole career. Like he's like screaming and like upset. And it's like, yeah, like it's perceived at the time of winning, but looking back, you can kind of go, that's some of the unbridled emotion that led to the future he had.
Yeah, I'm just going to move on from him. That's what I would rather. Mark Ingram, the future Heisman winning running back. I don't think of this game. And you know what? I probably should have added this to the things that I didn't remember until rewatching this game. But I don't think of this game as winning him the Heisman, but it really did. Like 3 rushing touchdowns against the Florida defense that had allowed 3 rushing touchdowns all year. He only had 4 yards per carry, but 189 scrimmage yards on 30 touches. And that was huge because at that time, Toby Gerhart was on a tear at the end of that season after he had 14 touchdowns in November. And if you recall, 2009 was the closest Heisman Trophy race ever. And I think we can say with certainty that Mark Ingram won the Heisman on this day. And I think we can also say with confidence, Ndamukong Suh. Did I butcher the pronunciation of Ndamukong? Probably. But he was probably the most dominant player in college football that year, and he only finished 4th, somehow behind Colt McCoy, even though Nebraska may or may not have, but definitely was robbed in the Big 12 championship against Texas. We don't need to relitigate that. But anyway, Mark Ingram, awesome in this game. His feet, so good. He becomes the first Bama player to win the Heisman Trophy. And if he had been hurt in this game like he was the previous game against Auburn in the Iron Bowl, you're not talking about him, ultimately being enshrined as the Heisman Trophy winner.
Absolutely. I know we got a lot to get to. I'll say that it's so wild looking back that he was their first Heisman winner, despite Bear Bryant, Gene Stallings, all that. That's one thing that Saban was able to consistently deliver that nobody else did there.
Julio Jones. I almost put him in the prominent extras because he had 2 catches for 28 yards in this game.
Joe Hayden.
Yeah. Yes. We'll get to him in a second here. He was blanketed by Joe Hayden in this one.
Wasn't his fault.
Yeah. He only had one 100-yard game this season. Sophomore slump kind of for Julio. And it's weird. Like at Bama, it happened to Amari Cooper. It happened to Calvin Ridley. It happened to Ryan Williams just now. Julio did it first before all those great Bama receivers, though, we forget that as great as he was as a true freshman, he didn't have a post-September touchdown that first year. So, Julio is still at that point where, yeah, he's kind of figuring out who he is as a receiver and as a player. The offense certainly had a lot to do with that as well. It was not a high volume passing offense, of course, but I did find myself wanting more and more Julio in this game. There was, however, a great early observation. The first play from Bama, where they receive the kickoff, something that Saban does not do. And they set the tone on that first play from scrimmage where they come out in a 3-receiver set out of shotgun. And Vern is trying to set the scene, and Gary interrupts him and goes, "Look at this spread." And then McElroy gets a nice pocket on a 5-man rush, hits Julio for a first down, and you get Vern from the jump saying, "How do you do?" Chef's kiss.
I have that written down too. This was vintage Vern and Gary, which could mean a lot of things. I'm sure we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
But the fact that they walked out in the most standard, non-confusing, like there was a tight end on the field, stuff we see and we go, that's boring. Like you need to put some motion in there today. They were like losing their marbles.
What is Bama doing?
Shotgun? What is this? I've never seen this before. And then like Florida was like in the 4-3 defense. They were like also shocked. They're throwing the ball here. They have Mark Ingram. And so they kind of brought like an inside blitz there. And dude was like wide open because nobody threw out of the shotgun on first down, especially not Alabama with a fullback who got a ton of reps and a Heisman winning running back.
And then Julio only gets one catch the rest of the game because, as you mentioned, Joe Hayden, the Florida corner, pretty darn good at his job. He was great. He had a couple of different pass breakups in this game. Part of the reason that Florida was the number one defense in the country. And Gary brought up on the broadcast like how this group had returned all 22 players from its first and second string defense from a national championship defense, which I don't know if that's happened since then. I'll just say it right now. Breaking news. That's never happening again, ever. Florida will forever hold on to that title. Florida, I realize that this past year you lost the last first-time national championship winner, but the 96 Florida team can no longer be called that because Indiana finally won a national championship after, many cracks at the apple, of course. But Florida, you that's yours. Just hang up the banner, statue, trophy, whatever you want. You will never see another team return all 22 players from its too deep on defense from a national championship winning team.
Kids were saying back then, I want to go for free fundamentally versus the NFL. Like we talk about players getting paid, but versus the NFL, it was not close back then. I want to go get screamed at by Urban Meyer at midnight and have like all these ridiculous like things happen in the background. That's culture. Say what you will, but dudes were bought in. They could have gone pro, made money, probably saved injury because the NFL was less physical than Florida, and they all lined up and came back.
Brandon Spikes said on Swamp Kings, "I'm just not ready to leave college. College is pretty fun. I'm just gonna do my thing here. I'm just gonna enjoy this." And then everybody's like, "Wait a minute, this could be a lot of fun." Tebow has that huge announcement, of course, at the Swamp, and all of a sudden it's expectations sky high.
Give me some creatine and a moped, coach. I'm coming back.
There might be others that you had for A-listers, but I might have also had them in breakout performance. Did you have any others listed for A-listers?
Let's see. We talked Hernandez. We talked Rolando McClain. I mean, he was awesome, and we'll get to him a little bit later. But it's it was a breakout performer. He was an A-lister, but the way he was able to track Tim Tebow, I mean, and again, we'll get to this a little bit later, but just felt like the most can't miss prospect ever. The lateral quickness he had, the nose for the football he had. He was such a cerebral player, which when you look at his career, you're like, kind of, didn't make the smartest decisions, but at that moment when he was still under the guard of Nick Saban, he was one of the most locked in. I mean, everything you'd want in a linebacker at the time that could truly stop the run, break up the pass, track everyone. And I mean, he was the key to the defense on the Alabama side, I think.
Well, there was a play this one where Tebow got out in space. And at that point in Tebow's career, then the eye was so accustomed to seeing him shed tackles in those spots, whether it was the stiff arm or just straight bull rushing you, he's going to juke past you, whatever. Tebow is going to find a way to get past and or through you. And Rolando McClain makes a tackle in the open field of Tebow's lower body that felt like such grown man strength. And I was so unused to seeing it that it stood out to me. Like, Tebow doesn't just go down like that. That is the guy that has broken more tackles in that exact spot than one can ever count. And Rolando McClain made it look so easy. You're right. Like his range, his ability to get downhill, he was a special, special player and someone that was a huge, huge part of turning around that entire Bama defense. And I just put the entire Bama defense as a breakout performer because up to that point, I think you would make the case exceptional unit. The year before, 7th in the country, they were in scoring defense. All right, Nick Saban's defense taking shape. Kirby Smart in year 2, because he wasn't there for year 1, but Kirby showed up in year 2, and you're thinking, all right, this good. This unit's really good. But this is a breakout performance of epic proportions because of what they were able to do to Tebow. So, like, I just included Mark Barron, Rolando McClain, Kareem Jackson, like Terrence Cody. We'll get to Mon Cody in a second here. Marcel Darius, like all of those guys as breakout performers, because to do what they did on this day to the Florida offense, I can't overstate it. Like, it is so remarkable the job that they did, how disciplined they were. Like, if you take away the special teams touchdown that they allowed in the opener in that same building against Virginia Tech, Bama's defense that year did not allow more than 21 points in a game during a 14-0 season. Pretty darn impressive.
Yeah, and a quick side note on that, I think that's why, looking back, the clock rule change does kind of make sense because, like, back then they were just slamming the air out of the ball. When you have Mark Ingram, it's like play keep away, and we'll get to this as far as they would just have these drives of death where they would just like sit on the ball and you couldn't get it from him, and then you would have to go out and try to score on the defense who was rested. And I'll say this to the Bama defense point, that Florida offense really still looked incredibly hard to defend when you look at the spread concepts. And they made the point about, it's hard to run between the tackles when you're in a spread back then, but they included this like power option stuff. Tebow ran a play in there that fascinated me. I'm sure teams have done it before. I'm sure they did it, but this is pretty fundamentally what the jump pass was, which is an RPO where the quarterback is the running back. So you start and it's like you're running, and then he would make the decision, will I run or will I go back and throw it? And you would think, how do you stop that? You have to stop Tebow from a first read run. Then he pops back and he has open guys. And the answer is that defense around McClain just covered everybody.
Yeah, I think there was one play. I don't remember who it was. It might have been Riley Cooper who slipped into space and was able to make a catch on it. But they weren't able to run that consistently at all. And it just felt like Bama defensively was one step ahead of everything that Florida was trying to do. Florida getting away from the run game in ways that we were just not used to seeing at all. Another breakout performer. I'd argue the breakout performer of this game. It's Greg McElroy.
Yep.
I do this unfair thing with McElroy mentally, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this camp. The play that I always think of when I think back on his career is him fist pumping after the 49-yard touchdown run by Trent Richardson in the national championship, a game after this, because we can all look back on that game and say that passing was at a minimum. It just was. And that's more so of like how I saw McElroy. And that's unfair to him. Like, it's very much unfair. He is admitted, look, it was a run first offense and he had to learn how to use that Rhodes Scholar brain of his, drink every time you heard that in a broadcast, to give Alabama the best offense possible. But my God, did he make some big time plays. This is the best game of his career. This was the best game of his career, averaging 13 yards per attempt against that defense. No joke. And he was clutch the week before in the Iron Bowl. He had the 3 fourth quarter comebacks that season. And they talked about on the broadcast as someone who has never lost a start either in high school or in college. And in this game, it was brought up frequently that Bama wanted Tebow. And when they missed out on Tebow, that's when they called Greg McElroy. So you had all that build up for him. And I'm sure it meant a lot to him to be able to beat Tebow on that stage. And man, he was locked in. He was even making blocks on the edge for Trent Richardson in this one. I thought McElroy was brilliant in this game.
Absolutely. I mean, I would say that the game, in a couple of ways, there are a couple of different moments of this game, but the touchdown he had to Colin Peak, that was kind of over Peak's wrong shoulder, and he adjusted to it perfectly. It was such a dime. And to watch those two guys that in sync to where they knew, okay, ball's going to be here. You got to flip around, catch it that way. Not a game manager on that day against a defense that is, like, honestly historically underrated. Like, could have been seen as better than Alabama, especially with the levels of talent they had. I mean, again, at every level, up front, linebackers, back end, Joe Hayden and Major Wright's like, what do you do about that? And the way that he was able to just take what the defense got him, one thing that was funny about this broadcast was the Carlos Dunlap arrest graphic that they did. But even without him, they were able to generate a pretty nice pass rush. And the way that McElroy took some hits, still delivered the football, the way that he didn't panic, I think was awesome. So, like, yeah, I think pretty far and away that there's one breakout performer for me, and it's McElroy or Peak, who also had a great game. He actually had a block where he came all the way around on that Mark Ingram screen pass. I was like 57 yards to kind of set them up at the end and just leveled this guy from the other side of the play. So I think those are your two for Bama.
Yeah, Trent Richardson is probably more of a breakout performer for the year because what he did as a true freshman, like carving out a role, even as Mark Ingram is sprinting off to the Heisman Trophy, is no small joke. And those two were sort of like Gurley and Chubb before Gurley and Chubb. Just silly that two guys that talented could be in the same backfield at the same time. And unlike other great SEC duos like Chubb and Michelle or Ronnie and Cadillac, you knew that at some point you were going to see Trent Richardson get the lion's share of the carries, with Ingram eventually going off to the NFL. Like, you knew that time was going to come. Very likely it was going to. And there was this building excitement for his game. And you could tell there was a certain level of juice. And it's not to say that he was a better player, especially not better than Mark Ingram on this day. But that was kind of the silver lining of, oh man, even if Bama wasn't going to have a fully healthy version of Mark Ingram in this game, at that point of the year, they felt really good about Trent Richardson, and he ended up still getting double-digit touches in this game and was plenty effective and was actually the more efficient runner in this game, just not necessarily the all-purpose guy in the way that Ingram turned out to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Just how do you, oh boy, we got Mark Ingram down. Oh man, here comes Trent Richardson, who again at the time was seen as, and Bama fans, of course, get to have their cake and eat it too, because the player they were promised in Trent Richardson became Derrick Henry, right? It's like you're gonna have this guy you get to root for later on. Don't worry, it just won't be this guy. And so, yeah, I mean, in terms of a guy that you to bring down in space in college as a backup, there's never been better.
The only other one that I had listed for the breakout performer, just because it was more of a season-long breakout, was Riley Cooper, one of the better SEC receivers in that 2009 season, and then he was never to be heard from again. All right.
I'll leave that one alone.
We'll move on. Kenny Chesney. Prominent extras. Let's start with Charlie Strong, a fascinating person in this. 4 days after this game, the Florida defensive coordinator, he bolts for the Louisville job. And it's interesting to look back on his comments that he made to the Orlando Sentinel a few weeks later. He thought race played a part in him not getting a head coaching job earlier, even though, Urban kept him from Ron Zook's staff. And that defense played a huge part in them winning 2 titles. And he still was like, man, why can't I get a head coaching job? I would love to know, Will, if Charlie Strong would have stayed at Florida had he known that Urban was about to self-combust. That's an interesting wrinkle in time because he ended up being a really good coach at Louisville. That's like what people forget. He only got that job at Texas because of how good he was at Louisville, especially at the end. But if he had stayed, and even if it had been a situation where like Urban is resigning at the end of, the 2009 season there, and they feel like they have the heir apparent, and Charlie Strong hasn't left for Louisville yet because he hears murmurs that Urban could step down. If they would have just moved forward with it then, and there wouldn't have been this drawn out process of like, oh, is Urban actually going to come back from his leave of absence, whatever. But instead, 4 days after this game, he's gone. And a staple of Florida, really, I mean, that entire decade is all of a sudden like on to bigger and better things.
Really good note with Louisville. I had written down how many happy days were there in Charlie Strong's career after this game, but the Louisville wrinkles are a really good one because he was on the way up. And after Louisville's where it started to get kind of rough for him. But yeah, I mean, supremely talented defense. I mean, it's just kind of what would I call it? An incomplete as a head coach. He had some good days, he had some bad days. I would say that the only pushback I would have to him potentially taking over for Urban is maybe the NCAA starts to sniff around a little bit more if you keep a guy from that old staff, like maybe resetting the deck after Urban was just a good move. But, I think that he's been a really well-respected defensive mind. And of course, like those defenses were so nuts. And it kind of, because again, Tebow, all that stuff, they were, I would say, kind of fundamentally defensive teams because that's what showed up in almost every game outside of the Ole Miss game.
Has a human being ever looked more jacked than Charlie Strong in those baggy polos? My God, that dude was a tank. It's so hard. Oh my God. It's so hard to look as yoked as he was in those shirts. And man, he was he was look, I know Florida was dealing with some injuries. Charlie Strong could have gotten out there and gotten 6 tackles. I have zero doubt whatsoever.
Yeah.
Assistants in this game were very prominent. Will Kurt Signetti. We had no on-air mentions of him, but the Alabama receivers coach, who was kind of always talking to McElroy on the sideline, a lot of sideline shots of a younger Kurt Signetti, including the one after the 69-yard touchdown to, or not 69-yard touchdown, but the 69-yard screen pass to Ingram. And they show him like following Saban. And he was a little bit more on camera than I was expecting him to be in this game, considering he was frustrated that he couldn't get promoted at Alabama, but he was kind of like more prevalent than I thought. And obviously I was looking out for him, of course, but yeah, Kurt Signetti there, and you would have never known it.
Funny to juxtapose the Marquise Mays tweet where he was kind of like calling Kurt Signetti soft, like recently, the last couple of months. And it's like looking back to this game where it goes, they were the best of friends on this day. Mays had a breakout day. They were all on the sideline together. And I mean, it just goes to show how many levels kind of are on this coaching staff. Because I mean, it's him and Kirby for kind of 1 and 2 coming out of this, which one of those makes sense or made sense at the time.
I think you saw Signetti more than Kirby in this one. There were not a lot of Kirby shots in this. Kirby looks young. I mean, he's 33.
Okay. People in my mind, like people call Kirby through and through a Georgia guy. Fundamentally, like phenotypically, he is an Alabama guy. And you see him with the bowl cut on the sidelines. I wish I had the communications between him and Saban whenever Tebow was crying, because I could see a very young, very Southern Kirby Smart just go, "Hey, look at him. He's crying. He's crying over there." Like that. He's just, he's crying. We got him. And like, I love that young Kirby who's just like happy-go-lucky, screaming on the sidelines. Like, you could just tell exactly where he's going to beat out. It's the least shocking part of this.
At that point, I don't think he was really getting the credit for the Alabama defense because it's Saban's defense, of course, but someone that became a huge part of that era. You know, it's interesting. Go tell someone watching this game that 10 of the next 17 national titles will be won by people in the building that day. And I don't know if like Harbaugh was in the building that day. I don't know if like Ryan Day was. I'm just talking about like people that were on the sidelines that day, because you had 6 from Saban, 2 from Kirby, 1 from Urban, 1 from Signetti. And the one from Urban wasn't even at Florida. So like, man, more than half of the national championships that would be won by those guys that were on the sideline in prominent roles that day.
Yeah.
Will, Jim McElwain, the Alabama OC. We got to give the Shark loving. No, we can't say that. We got to give him his flowers here. One of the OG Saban disciples. I thought he called a fantastic game.
He was cooking, man. Florida's like, we got to have that guy.
Okay. Funny you mentioned that. You know, I wondered about that. Did this game get Jim McElwain the Florida job 5 years later? Because we'll get to what would have happened if the result was flipped. But, you know, think about this. Jeremy Foley, the longtime Florida AD, was surely there that night. There's no doubt. You had one more year of Urban, but then 4 years of obviously offensively starved teams under Muschamp. And who's rising up the ranks? The guy who played a massive role in Florida's dominance ending 5 years earlier. I guarantee you that at some point in those conversations that this specific game and how dialed in Jim McElwain was, I guarantee you that played a part in him getting that job.
You know, I used to think when I was young and working in sports that like these guys at the top were like these brainiacs who had all these call sheets and all these advisors. Those advisors are just paid to tell to do what they were going to do anyway. And the more I see it, the more I see that these specific instances and the feelings that people feel at the top really end up being why they make the decisions they make. And I think that probably checks out.
It has to. Maybe it wasn't all of it, but it was definitely part of it. I mean, that call, the touchdown to put it away, where he uses Julio on the fake sweep and he's got the tight end coming across. Like, it's just, this is the type of stuff that gets you jobs. It just does. Like, you do those things on that type of stage. And obviously he didn't go directly to Florida, but couldn't help but think of that. And I don't know if I had just never connected those dots, but I think there's definitely something to that. Did you have anybody else here for this category for prominent extras? Because I usually just more often than not, I list coaches here.
So for extras here, so that's what confused me is I was like, is this about coaches or players?
It can be about both. It can be about both, but I usually end up just going with coaches.
David Nelson, That's a guy that in Florida history, wasn't aware of how big of a deal he was. He had the only touchdown for Florida in this game, and he was the recipient of the Tebow jump pass in the previous game in 2008 in their championship. And hey, he came to play too. I think that is like just a nice talking about some dudes guy, bigger receiver that in these big games would often step up. So Peak on one side obviously made the big impact we talked about, but I think let's give David Nelson his flowers because he was awesome.
Undrafted, but a guy that was just, as they said on the broadcast, kind of always open for Florida. And they lacked some of that offensive firepower on the outside, which is kind of a crazy thing to say out loud. But he was a guy that Tebow definitely relied on a lot during 09 post Percy Harvin. Okay, favorite line from the broadcast. It's the middle of the second quarter, and McElroy starts scrambling, seemingly to nowhere. But he tiptoes the sideline and somehow keeps his balance to be able to pick up the first down. And Vern goes, God bless Vern Lundquist. He goes, wow, a Baryshnikov.
Connor, if I had a nickel for every time that famous ballerina Mikhail Baryshnikov has been listed so far in our two adjustment wars, I would have 2 nickels. That's more than it should be.
I had to look it up too. No idea what he meant. I had no idea. Famous ballet dancer from the 70s and 80s. When Gary has to check you on a reference and he's willing to check you on a reference, that's when you know that your 69-year-old play-by-play man, he's reaching the end of his time. And we love Vern. Vern as the soundtrack of SEC on CBS, I will always defend. But man, some of these references that he would come up with on the spot, you're just like, what did that dude just say?
Wait,
I
Connor,
couldn't believe it.
Matt Corral Tom Hart said this about Matt Corral in the last game.
Wait a minute.
Yes, that's why I said that. But remember, I was like, who is this? That was one of the ones I had written down. I was like, wow, they were cooking.
I forgot that.
References in 2 games, brother.
I shouldn't have had to look that up. I completely okay, that's on me. How did I not know what a Baryshnikov was?
Maybe it's oddly specific. I was like, it was crazy when Tom Hart said it. Then I heard like Vern say it. And I was like, is this someone that I just missed out on? This famous ballet dancer from the 70s? But no, he's been referenced in both of our games.
I think we need to do a Baryshnikov reference for every game. The Baryshnikov moment of the game. What a legend.
There you go.
Golly. Yeah, that was my favorite. It wasn't even close.
Yeah, I wrote down, the line about teams going 12-0. Oh, here is a great one. Vern and Gary back and forth. Are you a big time of possession guy? From Vern. Gary. Well, I am if you win. And then just immediate, just the amount of analysis these dudes were doing. Okay, football was closer to like 1960 in this game than it is right now.
I think so too.
And broadcasters, man, like we could dump on the guys we have now, but at least like the guys in the booth, like they're giving them like next gen stats. I was actively fact checking almost everything they were telling me because like half of it was wrong. I'm not even sure what happened in this game because they were just saying stuff. Part of it feels cool. Like it feels like watching a game with your uncles a little bit, but they were just making stuff up. And the way that like they were just showing Tebow on the sideline, the amount of times they did. And this was famously, I believe this is right before the Musburger game with the girlfriend, right?
Catherine
this is
Webb.
like a couple years before that. So yeah, like broadcasters back then were like just a little bit more
out of pocket.
They were, and they would kind of go after athletes too. Like it was kind of weird to see like these graphics and stuff they would do. It's like, this is not, if you did this in like the woke era, most of the stuff that they did, you would get canceled, man.
Tracy Wolfson makes a reference to having pickle juice on the sideline for Trent Richardson because he was cramping up. And Vern goes, they just gave us a bunch of different ways we could go with that. And then he just kind of drifts off into nothing. And you're like,
what does that mean, Vern? What does that mean, Uncle Vern?
Vern wouldn't have thought that. Maybe at 19, I would have thought that. Would not have thought that. Pretty well-known thing at this point. Mustard packets, pickle juice, do what you got to do to get rid of cramps. But him taking it to that level, I was like, that's an awful announcing headline. Vern Lundquist doesn't know what to do with pickle juice. God, it was great.
Do they have to squeeze anyway? Yeah. As much grief as we give commentators today, and again they're in 4K. I got instant replay. Just go watch an old Vern and Gary game. You're gonna feel like you could do the play-by-play, and that's some of it's nice. Like it's nice to have like some of those like moments that we're talking about with the catchphrases and stuff. But yeah, a lot of it can be cleaned up in the modern era.
Yeah. And they didn't get called out in the same sort of way. Again, I think Vern and Gary are great. Like they're the soundtrack to so many childhoods. And there are so many things that are said. Like, all right, so coldest takes from the broadcast. We'll go to that one. Vern has a tough slip up. Florida gets backside pressure on McElroy as he's getting ready to throw this pass. And Vern goes, "Was that a fumble or a forward pass?" McElroy never let go of the ball. I'm like, I don't know what he saw. I'm pretty sure that football never hit the ground or went anywhere. McElroy just held on to it. It feels cheap to say that Vern has the cold takes because, again, he's getting up there at age. It's like later on in his career. But yeah, I mean, he had a few of those where, like, even on the missed extra point, where they're freaking out. They're like, "Oh, this can be returned."
This is a live ball. I'm like, no, it's not, brother. Have you ever watched a game of football? You can't hit the upright and return that. That's what I've written down.
Yeah, it's like, no, this play is actually dead, and they had to get a producer in their ear because Gary didn't know that either. Gary's like kind of scrambling, and they're thinking, "Oh, yeah, Florida can return this." No, they can't. That's not a rule. Or it is a rule that once the ball hits the goalpost, it's dead.
Yeah, what a time.
What a time, man. All right. Oh, also, by the way, for coldest take, the pregame skepticism about the Mark Ingram hip injury, I don't know. I don't know if that was planted, if there was a little bit on the Alabama sideline, but Tracy Wolfson asked Saban before the game, and he was kind of just like, "Hey, like we got a lot of other players, we're going to see what we got out of him, blah, blah, blah." But this, to me, was one of those things that I think by the middle of the second quarter, you're like, no, he's fine. He is perfectly okay. And then he ends up getting 30 touches and clinches the Heisman Trophy, and whatever sort of injury he was dealing with was clearly not a factor. But so you had that. And then Gary said at the end of the game, now it looks for sure it's coming down to Mark Ingram and Colt McCoy for the Heisman. McCoy hadn't played in the Big 12 championship yet. Again, that was going to be later that night. But Ingram won. Colt McCoy finished third. And it was kind of a distant third to Toby Gerhart.
More ginger erasure. Look at this. Wow.
Whoa. Who are we throwing in the ginger? Colt McCoy's not a ginger.
No, Toby Gerhart.
Would we consider him a ginger?
You tell me, man. But again, guy from Stanford, wow. They're just pretending like he doesn't exist. This is sad.
I don't think every white running back is a ginger, Will. Let's get some Toby Gerhart images here. This man is that's close. No. Strawberry blonde. I'm going to say he's not a ginger.
If someone is significantly worse at tanning than you, I think they're a ginger.
Whoa. Skin tone and hair color are two different things. Don't like where we're going with this conversation. That man is not a ginger.
If I used a green screen on him in a Stanford jersey, his whole face would disappear. That's all I'm going to say.
All right, that's fair. Okay, the Jadeveon Clowney reminder that normal people don't play this game. I have two here. Actually, you want to start us off for this one?
Go ahead. I got to go find my tab. I was looking at Toby Gerhart's face.
All right, the first is McElroy. I think he is seen by a lot of people as this normal guy who benefited from ideal surroundings. And to call McElroy normal just couldn't be further from the truth. I realize, again, I'm not sure if you heard while watching this game, but he's a Rhodes Scholar whose dad was the VP of the Dallas Cowboys at the time. And the plays that he makes in this game make you go, all right, this is not just a normal human being doing this. Those are not normal feet. He had the two best scrambles in this game, a game in which Tim Tebow was playing in this game. One was the pirouette on the sideline, which he somehow stays in bounds, picks up the first down. It's a huge, huge play to be able to extend this drive. And then the other was in the midst of the joyless murder ball rise, the 17-play, 88-yard drive that spans the latter half of the third quarter and into the fourth quarter, lasted nearly 9 minutes. It puts the game away, and McElroy somehow keeps his balance on this scramble in the red zone. And so I texted him, and I asked him which one he liked better. And he's like, the sideline one for sure. He was actually mad that he didn't score on the scramble in the red zone. And you can kind of see, slams the football down a little bit, and he kind of gets up, and you think, oh, he's fired up. He just made a big time play. No, he was actually pissed off. So a little bit of a surprise there. And the sideline scamper, as he told me, was indeed pretty sick. I think I would replay that one a lot because his feet, he gets a nice block from Ingram on the outside, but his feet to be able to stay in bounds, you're like, wait, what? I had to rewind it 3 or 4 different times because I thought there was no way possible that he stayed in bounds. But Greg McElroy is not a normal person, and he played the game of his life.
Yeah, I mean, that just goes to show the level of talent in the SEC that he can have all of those things going, not losing a game for like several years. And then people are still like, this guy's a system player. And he
Right.
balls out like that. Yeah, I mean, I think, and you can kind of see, with his sideline interview at the end of the game, how he was already kind of ready for that microphone. He was like rattling off stats of Alabama history. So yeah, big moment for him for sure. Mine for this one, again, Rolando McClain. I think just like physically watching him, the time he caught Jeff Demps on the edge.
I don't know how he caught him. I don't know how he caught him on that play.
When you're Jeff Demps, size isn't your friend, but when you cut up field, nobody's catching you. And then you look up and there's a freight train that's catching the Ferrari, and you're going, maybe this isn't our day, bro.
Yeah. His speed, man, truly special at that size. Just could chase down anybody. And that felt like a huge source of frustration that Florida just couldn't get to the edge. They had so many guys. And in that offense, it's getting to the edges and beating guys to be able to get upfield and be able to turn the corner. And Bama just had too many of those guys that could beat you sideline to sideline. The other one that I had for this, Will, Terrence Cody.
Terrence Cody existing, just being a lad. Oh, bring back the nose tackle, Connor.
I'm so glad that McElroy did not score on that scramble, because what it gave us was also Mark Ingram's third touchdown may or may not have helped win him the Heisman Trophy. But you got Terrence Cody, a 349-pound defensive tackle who lines up in that spot at fullback and makes the key block to be able to barely get Ingram into the end zone. And he did what many people thought Caden Proctor was doing, albeit with maybe, I don't want to say that. I think what Terrence Cody did on both sides of the ball was darn impressive. Darn impressive.
I'm glad you bring up Caden Proctor, because I would actually take Mount Cody in that situation over Caden Proctor with just a head of steam, full of rage, ready to kill the guy in front of him. I think that might be a little bit what's lacking at Caden Proctor at times, is like the will to kill the person in front of you. But he put me behind that guy, and I feel like I could scamper for a touchdown or two in that offense.
Florida couldn't run the ball as a result of Terrence Cody taking up 3 different spots on the defensive line and just being this massive human being who, by the way, lost weight coming into this season. He got down to 349 pounds, and he still was such a space eater up front, man. Like the things that he was able to do, they'd show these replays of Florida, like the rare instances of Florida trying to run the football, and he's taking on 2 guys easily. Like, it's no big deal.
2 Pouncies, not just 2 guys, 2 like Hall of Fame, 2 brothers that were telepathically linked. He was throwing them sideways.
Oh man. But yeah, Terrence Cody, just a freak of all freaks. Who else do you have?
That was about it for me. Terrence Cody was also my last one.
Yeah, had to be. Okay, the Trent Richardson. I can't believe they didn't make it in the NFL. Trent Richardson. This game actually isn't the best for that, because he's only a true freshman in this game. There are other games we could probably use to illustrate that. If we want another, and maybe this is stepping on your toes a little bit here, so apologies for that. It's almost this entire game, Will. It's almost this entire cast and crew that is loaded with household names. And here's what I mean by that, because you've got Julio is a future Hall of Famer. Like, when his time comes to get to Canton, like he's got a really good chance of being a first ballot guy. And it's funny considering I think he only got 4 targets in this one. We talked about the coverage that Joe Hayden had on him. And this is something that I'm trying to put into perspective here, because there's a lot of players that had good, solid NFL careers that came from this game. But this is a 1 versus 2 matchup where you're talking about like peak accumulation of talent at the SEC level at a time in which you could stockpile talent in ways that you cannot currently. But I think that Julio and Marquise Pouncey are the only 2 guys that emerged as true NFL superstars, at least who were in this game, because Bama had 7 guys drafted the following year, none of whom made it to a Pro Bowl. 2011, you had the draft with Julio, Marcel Darius, Mark Ingram, a lot of solid NFL players there, of course. But and then Dante Hightower wasn't playing in this game, but he ends up having a really, successful NFL career. He was out in this game for a torn ACL. And then on the Florida side, you have Joe Hayden, again, like a few Pro Bowls. Marquise Pouncey was the standout, and you had a Carlos Dunlap, Mike Pouncey. Again, these are good NFL players. You had 7 future Pro Bowl guys emerge who played in this game, right? But Bama was essentially forced to stay away from Julio in this game because of Joe Hayden, while Florida completely abandoned their biggest advantage, which was the interior run game with the Pouncey twins. So the most notable NFL guys in this game were essentially non-factors. So that's kind of the weird thing to think about, even though this game is like you can rattle so many people who weren't fans of these two teams are like, oh yeah, I know that guy, I know that guy, I know that guy. And yet you look up and you're kind of like, I, I guess we didn't necessarily get the prominent figures in this game emerging into NFL, NFL legends.
I think that's a good point. There are lots of weird circumstances in there, right? I personally think Joe Hayden was awesome. Maybe he's not like a Hall of Famer, but I think he's just that Hall of very good.
Yeah.
Like a guy that was just a lot of different places, a lot of longevity.
Two places.
And
yeah.
so but like positionally, you know what I'm saying? Like they moved him around a little bit. Like he was just like a useful dude that could just be kind of plugged in. So yeah, that's maybe my line of demarcation. But again, you're right. Like I think that in terms of guys who didn't make it in the NFL. I think Rolando McClain's right there, which again, I don't think is exactly, it's more injury off the field stuff,
Sure.
Different from Trent Richardson though, because Trent Richardson just never evolved. Rolando McClain, I think, was good enough to be an NFL player that he just got in his own way. I am just creating a list now after 2 of these games of just undercover short kings, guys that I did not know were 5'8". So there are 3 of these in this game. Marquise Mays. Why didn't he go anywhere? Because he was 5'8". Jeff Demps, same situation. We talked about Ahmad Black. That's another guy, 5'7". Yep. And so often, if a guy doesn't make it in the NFL, look at their height, look at their 40 time. That'll probably tell you what you need to know. So, yeah, I think in terms of that, like most of the guys, like how about this? Who would you say was a disappointment? Like that was really like, this guy was a first rounder or a second rounder. We hung the franchise on him from this team, and he let us down.
It's a tough question to answer because I don't. It's probably McClain. It's probably Rolando McClain, and I hate putting him in that camp because you're right. A lot of other things contributed to that. Like Brandon Spikes was a guy that probably hurt his draft stock in 2009, and maybe he wasn't. Him not being fully healthy at a key time hurt his draft stock. I thought he would have a much better NFL career. The rules changing probably didn't benefit someone like Major Wright, who was such a good hitter at the second level and again was fine in the NFL, but not one of these like long time type guys. But I don't know. Tebow is probably the answer that everybody's saying you need to go all in with. John Elway went all in with Tebow, takes him in the first round, and we know how it plays out with him. So he's probably the answer to that. But I don't think there was this feeling at this time of the best is yet to come for Tebow. I think there was still a feeling at the time of, yes, we're going to hear a lot more about him, but I don't know that we will look back on his time in college and go, that was just the beginning. You know what I mean? So I don't even know if that's really the fair answer.
And I almost think that McDaniel was kind of taking that that risk on him and taking him in the first round was way out of. I don't think anybody else would have taken him in the first round. I think that everyone was pretty locked into what he was. And then he had that weird miracle game, Ryan Clark sickle cell against the Steelers, where he didn't play. They had a long touchdown to Demarius Thomas. So that cemented his legacy. But I think so many things went right for him to get there that it wasn't an opportunity missed. So I think on the Florida side, again, 2 guys we said not to talk about, but they did go in opposite directions here. Hernandez off the field stuff prevented his career. He was a good draft pick, but a bad dude, so that didn't work out for them. I already went into it. Riley Cooper, NFL career kind of went better than I think people would have thought. But yeah, I mean, he's probably the only riser I would say in this game, guy that did better than we thought he would do, considering he bumped around the league for as long as he did. But yeah, just a loaded roster on both sides.
Kenny Chesney. Yeah. So look, that maybe that's too. That's a bit too broad of a take to have about that. But I just kind of, the more I dug into that, the more I kind of realized, man, you couldn't have told anybody back in 2009 that it would be a lot of really good, a lot of solid, but not necessarily a ton of elite superstar talent. And the guys that were in this game, just not in that, the guys that did end up being those stars just weren't necessarily in the starting roles. Okay, the thing you didn't know / remember until rewatching or researching this game, I had a few of these because, again, I was playing some Flip Cup. I was trying to do Louisville Chugger. if you don't know, you need to look up that game. Really, it's a lot of fun. You got to get the right amount of space to be able to do it and everything. But 19-year-old Connor, yes, I was underage. I had a bit of fun that day. So there were a few for me. Do you want to start us off on this one?
I'll let you go first here as well.
Okay. The thing that I forgot was that Bama had this dramatic comeback in the Iron Bowl a week earlier to guarantee that it was still a 1-2 game. But Bama probably could have still lost the Iron Bowl and still won a national title. I know that respecters of the BCS don't want to talk about games as being meaningless. I'm not here to say that the Iron Bowl was meaningless. I'm just saying meaningless in a national title path. It was always going to come down to beating Florida for them. And I still think that they would have jumped up to at least that 2 spot, knowing that Florida was going to be number 1. And if they had fallen to 5 or something, like I don't know that they would have fallen behind Cincinnati or anything. Like I don't remember what exactly like the BCS metrics would have done for that Auburn loss, but it just kind of felt like if Bama had overcome the Florida juggernaut, that it would have still been playing for a national championship. So I forgot that. And I think that, all right, how do I say this delicately? I think that there are a lot of people that wanted to see these group of 5 or borderline group of 5, whatever the Big East was at that time. They wanted to see these teams get that opportunity on that big stage. 2007 season had kind of opened us up to those possibilities. And this year was actually really good for teams at that level. And it kind of set the stage for the realignment that was going to come, with Cincinnati being really good. TCU was awesome. Boise State. Those were all undefeated teams. And I had kind of forgotten how many undefeated teams there were at the top going into conference championship weekend. And at the same time, I still think 1-loss Bama probably would have been okay if it had just beaten Florida like it ended up doing.
Yeah, I think that, I think this is the classic gentleman's agreement of whoever wins this game moves on, whoever loses, your life is pointless. Like that's what everybody was saying. Now, again, but we don't even get the Bama bump at this point. It's not like if Bama lost, they would have played Florida. Florida was that team. Maybe if Florida lost close, it'd be a little bit different, but they obviously didn't. And I'll say to that point, I went into this game remembering kind of a sleeper, but there were some moments for Florida that I had forgotten about. Primarily Bama's punter stopping a potentially a touchdown by the return man when he cut it upfield, and Bama's punter just lowers his shoulder. I had too much Bama in me, Paul. He made that play that really kind of set them up, and they ended up not scoring on that drive instead of potentially James taking up the sideline. And also that drive that Florida had at the end of the first half that basically put them in a situation where they could come all the way back and they had momentum, and then silence by Greg McElroy.
Yes, big time silence. This is where my Yankees going to show. Big time. I forgot about the Carlos Dunlap suspension. Speaking of sleeper, a DUI right before the SEC championship. Police found him asleep in his car, slumped over the wheel. It was 3:30 in the morning in Gainesville on a Tuesday, and not even Urban could let that one slide. Massive, massive loss for a guy that was their best pass rusher. This was the MVP of the national championship game the previous year. And it was also kind of a fitting end to the way that the Urban era played out, and just felt like a fitting footnote for this game. And,
he finally punished somebody and it cost him.
Yeah. How much do you think Urban thought at halftime of this one? Let's go get Carlos.
So we've got the police chief of Gainesville on the phone with Mike's Live here at halftime, and he's decided to change his tune. That actually wasn't Carlos Dunlap.
Indefinite suspension. Indefinitely, he will be suspended for 1 half, and not a second more. That would have been so funny. I kind of wish we had gotten that, but also it wasn't going to happen. They brought it up on the broadcast a lot, to the point where I was kind of dang, they're really getting into some of the details with this. I talked to a Gator fan who was in attendance that day. I can't believe that this actually happened, but given how much Florida fans have tried to just totally erase this memory from their brains, there's no way this didn't happen with how it was described to me. There was a Bama fan at the stadium who had a sign that read, "Shh, Carlos is sleeping." And they showed it on the Georgia Dome Jumbotron several times. That type of thing never happens. If you've been to these neutral site games, you never get that type of dig from a camera person that's going to show that on the big screen. Yeah, you might get the occasional they're going to troll with the chomp or something like that. But to have that sign shown repeatedly was just a kick to the teeth for every Florida fan.
You know, everyone talks about, oh, things would be so crazy with social media. Social media made things way more tame. I'll be
I kind
honest.
of think you're right, Will.
It really did, because I vividly remember that graphic, Cotter, that started the game with the fake newspaper. I brought it up earlier. That was just like Carlos Dunlap arrested in like a word art MS Paint. I'm like, the thought of putting a what we described today, a young man's future, in a one mistake he made, and they're just like, well, this guy's a criminal. He's not playing today.
They were a lot more blunt with. I was surprised. There were a few moments where I was like, oh, okay, they're really kind of letting him have it. And to be fair, yes, I think you could ask Carlos. In hindsight, he wishes he had that one back. I think everybody would agree on that. But look, if he's not asleep at the wheel and if he's out there for Florida, I don't know that he makes the difference. I think he makes a difference. But this game was decided by 19 points, and Bama was the more prepared team. So I don't think that if you're a Florida fan, you can play that card and go, if we had just had Dunlap out there, I think we would have been fine.
This is going to sound like a tangent, but just hear me out. I think we could see the change in society by one Jim McElwain, right? Because hear me out. Okay, Tim Tebow's number gets given out, previous season. I feel like if something like that happens today, you have like DHS involved. Like, it's like, whoa, someone said something really threatening to Tim Tebow. We got to lock it down. We got to put him in witness protection. Because now, fast forward to Jim McElwain just making up terroristic threats and everybody believing him and just being like, that's what we do now. You get someone's personal information out there. Anybody can say anything, and now it's a threat. And people have gone insane. That's my takeaway there. We used to just be able to give out, this is going to sound insane, but you used to just be able to give out college players' numbers on a sign and just text them, mean stuff and move on. And now, like, every time that happens, it's like, oh, this guy's well-being. They're scared now.
I think on the broadcast, they would have been a lot more protective of that than they were. Not that they would treat it with total kid gloves. They would have to address it at the top, but they kind of kept coming back to it. And I was a little bit surprised. But yeah.
And how would the Alabama run game be affected by that criminal Carlos Dunlap?
Yeah. Dang, Vern, let him have it, man. What did you have for the thing that you forgot or didn't remember until rewatching this?
Yeah, it was just those two moments of like Florida almost taking the lead and like how much juice they had at certain points in the game because of Joyless Murderball, because history has kind of rewritten itself to say, and again, you talked about like the closeness of the Heisman race. It's so interesting how something could be true for 11 weeks of the season or 12 weeks of the season, but then the reality is remembered in infinite time. So we look back and think like, wow, like Mark Ingram ran away with that. He had an all-time. It was great. This is inevitable for Alabama. But yeah, I think that just a couple of different plays going differently. Again, the Bama punter is so weird to me because they could have potentially gotten a break for their defense, done some other things. Instead, they would just got blown out.
Yeah, it did feel a little bit more competitive than I remembered it being, at least for certain moments. And you had the elements of the comeback the previous year. Comeback is different when you're down 19 versus, down 3, whatever it was, going into the fourth quarter. But yeah, there were at least a few of those moments in the second half early on where you thought, hey, if Florida makes a stop here, if Florida doesn't jump off sides on this third down, then they're going to have a really good chance. And instead, they just kind of couldn't get out of their own way in this one. When the losing team blew it, the second that Florida walked off the field of the 2008 SEC championship, it's kind of true,
When the newspapers came out the next day, Saban just bought 1,000 of them.
Just put them on every locker at Alabama. Wouldn't surprise me. To that point, Saban was 13-1 in revenge games. They brought that up very late in the broadcast. Seems like the type of information that they should have brought up earlier, but whatever, I get it. He's still, not at the peak level of Saban yet. But the only time that he lost in one of those revenge type games was Spurrier beating him in consecutive years. Ironically enough, Spurrier's last 2 years at Florida, 2000 and 2001. And it wasn't until 2011 that Saban would lose a revenge game as Alabama's head coach. But we'll earmuff this. Saban then got the ultimate revenge because he still got the LSU rematch in that 2011 season. So did he really lose a rematch game 2010 and 2011 to LSU? You could debate that. But this was the beginning of Saban being the most adapt or die person that college football has ever known. This is when beginning of Joyless Murderball, beginning of the Saban dynasty, all of these things are true and they played out on this day.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. It's like, he always gets the last laugh. And again, like this wasn't a time when people were, the polls had given him credit or anything like that. I think it's just inevitable. And if you get one, if you like Steven Garcia has made a whole career off of just getting one, but you don't get two in a row, do you?
You just don't. You just don't. Unless you're Hugh Freeze. The play that was
Oh,
probably
wait, really quick. I was responding to your thing. Mine was the 8 minute like death march.
yes.
That was just absolute. I love a death march drive. That's one of my favorite little things where it's like, yeah, anybody can score on a broken play, like one play is 75 yards. But if you can just average 4.5 yards per play over the course of like a 12 play drive like that, and you're just leaning
17
forward,
play.
leading forward. Yeah, exactly. Like it's yeah, it was longer than that. You're so right. And so yeah, like it's just so demoralizing to say, hey, technically we probably could take some shots here and score, but we don't want to. We want to sit there and torture you and make you suffer. Charlie Strong and this great defense and Brandon Spikes. And, I just think that really, again, that's Joyless Murder Ball is just punching Florida in the mouth over and over again to just let them know we're up a couple scores here and it's only going to get worse from you from this moment. You're not even going to get the ball really.
That's when it was 26-13. And you're right. If Florida's defense gets them off the field, who knows? You got Tebow, you got a chance to score 2 touchdowns. And instead, sandwiched in between that drive in which they have the ball the entire latter half of the third quarter, Tebow gives his pump up speech going into the fourth quarter on the sideline where he's just like laying into the defense and he's letting them know.
And the lads
And
didn't look bought in. I'm going to be honest. They looked like they wanted to go home. They were like, okay, Tim. All
I,
right, man. You ain't out there trying to hit these guys. All right, man.
this has never been talked about probably in depth enough, but the divide of the Florida offense and the Florida defense that year, it was pretty significant. They talked about it in Swamp Kings briefly, and almost like they worked through it with that game that they had at Mississippi State, where Tebow and Spikes had to be separated at halftime in the midst of Dan Mullen's first game against Florida, like the first year that Mullen is away, which also probably played a little bit of a factor at points with that 09 team that doesn't really get discussed probably enough as well. But the divide between those two units, where Florida's defense had all that star power, and they did do a lot of heavy lifting that season, like there's no doubt about it. And yet Tebow is the one that gets put on the pedestal all the time. And there's undoubtedly going to be friction between 21, 22-year-old guys in that spot who have had a lot of success. It would have been a miracle if there wasn't any sort of friction, but that's what Urban has talked about since then, saying he regrets that. Like he should have done a better job of being able to kind of mend those fences instead of letting this gladiator-like mentality play out where it's the two sides at odds. And he's like thinking at the time, this is going to make him better. This is going to make him more competitive. And they needed to be more cohesive. And so at that point, when Joyless Murder Ball was happening before our eyes and Tebow is laying into the defense, it kind of felt like it was falling on flat ears at that point. And not to say that if they had been bought into Tebow, they like get a stop there necessarily. But I just think it's important to kind of remember why that Florida team felt so disjointed at times.
And it's almost like where people say a coach's message can get stale over time. Hearing all the pump up speeches from Tebow. If you're
Right.
if you're in, like the Ole Miss game that they lost, right? It's like the defense didn't play that well in that game, and they got stopped in fourth down, and he said, "Hey, this is me. I'm a great leader." Well, that rings a little bit differently when your offense has one touchdown and the defense is on the field for the whole game, and you're like, "Tim, brother, you're on this team too. You're the captain of this team. What if you just kind of like ran it a little bit? What if we just did some screen action? My legs are tired. These guys are big. Stop." And it literally, like I said, it looked like he was the coach and they were a checked out NBA locker room. And they were like, dude, I'm thinking of Cancun right now. These guys hurt a lot.
They mentioned early on in the game too that Tebow, Gary said on the broadcast that Tebow, look how calm he is. And I kind of thought that was a little bit bad for his style and what they needed at that point. Maybe they needed that speech going into the second quarter or something because Florida came out very flat and very surprised. And Bama just had every sort of response. And if you're looking for another instance of when the losing team, ultimately lost this game, I do think that screen pass to Ingram was so important because Florida had just finally gotten into the end zone and boom, Bama, just like that, is down back in Florida's territory. And that was kind of the sign of Bama's not backing down today. And they might have backed down last year, but this is a different sort of feeling. And we saw that play out. What would have happened if the result was flipped? This is where we go down the rabbit hole, Will. There's kind of a boring Florida answer to this, and maybe you'll disagree with this, but even if Florida had won this game and gone on to beat Texas in the national championship, which was not a given, Urban still would have driven himself mad in a post-Tebow world. I think we can all look at the issues that he had with losing and with just the concept of failure in general and say that with pretty good certainty. And maybe instead of 2010 being his last season, it's 2011 or 2012. And then, Charlie Strong, I mentioned him before. Like, what if he had just stayed at Florida knowing that Urban was about to self combust? And maybe you bring Charlie Strong on board after the 2011 season or after the 2012 season and you avoid the Muschamp era. Or maybe it's just that plays out as well with Charlie Strong instead of Muschamp. I don't know.
That's the thing. Charlie Strong and Muschamp are very similar coaches.
Yeah.
So it's kind of easy to see how this would have gone with Charlie Strong. They're great defensive guys. They bring a lot of physicality. They're great recruiters, but the other stuff, not so good.
Yeah, and maybe there was a resistance to do that because Charlie Strong was a Zook guy, and Zook is kind of considered to be one of the worst Florida coaches ever. And like, there's probably
At that time.
Yeah, definitely. You could make the case that like what he inherited at that time too, and like what the lack of success that they're able to sustain post Spurrier. I don't know. You can go a lot of different ways with that, but we know that 3 weeks after this game, Urban goes on his leave of absence. That, of course, does not happen if they're preparing for a national championship. He's still popping his 2 Ambien, washing it down with a beer, getting his 4 hours of sleep maybe, and still trying to just hold on for dear life. And look, you could tell me that Florida had played with fire to get to that point. If they had gotten to 13-0 or something like that, I would still take Tebow to win against Texas, to win his third in 4 years. But the Florida answer is kind of boring. Do you agree or disagree with that of like what would have happened if the result was flipped? Because Tebow's legacy is safe.
Well, I'll add a wrinkle here, and I'm glad you actually didn't touch on it, which is that, hey, the Colt McCoy injury completely shaped that game.
I know.
And they were a team that gave Bama fits even without their quarterback. And, an injury is something where it's like, if they choose to run the ball that play, it's sliding doors. It just wouldn't have, you don't get popped in the shoulder. You just play the next play or whatever. I don't think that was the thing that he'd been nursing all year that got re-aggravated. I think he just got hit one time. And so I could be wrong there. And guys are always kind of banged up. You never really know. But what if we see healthy Colt McCoy out there and he just lights Florida up the same way that we just saw with McElroy, who was, respect to Greg McElroy, but Colt McCoy was a better quarterback than him, right? Like he was in the Heisman conversation, have a long NFL career. And so I think that seeing those cracks show, I would almost say that Florida loses to Texas more than likely.
Probably. There's probably a case to be made for that. I shouldn't say probably, but I think it kind of depends on how much we're flipping the result with Bama. Are we saying that they win in the same sort of fashion where it's a fourth quarter comeback and all of a sudden the team rallies together? Because if you recall, what Florida did in 2006 was play their best game of the season in the national championship against Ohio State. Could they have theoretically done that against Texas? This level that you had expected them to hit throughout 2009 that they just never quite got to. Could they have gotten to that level against Texas? Again, I don't know. It's kind of in the eye of the beholder with that one. But yeah, Florida, I think Urban crashes out. Urban still crashes out, win or lose.
That's the thing. Regardless of what happens next, he could win 2 straight titles. He's not going to win 10, know?
Yeah, he definitely would have. Speaking of guys who maybe could win 10, Saban didn't win 10. But instead of this being a passing of the torch game, if we can flip the result and give Florida the win instead of Bama, Saban becomes this guy can't win the big one guy going into 2010. Now, there are 2 ways to look at Bama's 3-loss season that followed in 2010, where they're preseason number 1 coming off a national championship. One is that it was an extremely talented team that was coming off of a national championship and that they were always maybe going to underachieve. I've always brought up the stat about preseason number 1s. 2017 Alabama is the only preseason number 1 to win a national championship in the last 2 decades. Or did Bama underachieve not because of this overwhelming pressure, but because this was just a team that had some holes, and they had some holes in some key spots. They had stars, but they had some holes in some key spots, maybe on defense. Because if it was a flawed team in some key spots and the season still plays out the same sort of way with 3 conference losses, 5-3 in SEC play, I have such a wild thought that I almost didn't even want to include it here, but now we have to.
Please.
Nick Saban enters year 5 getting hot seat talk. The greatest coach in the history of this sport goes from trying to build up this dynasty to just coaching for his job with a long offseason going into 2011. Do I think Saban probably overcomes hot seat talk? Yes, I do. Because we know how 2011 plays out. Of course, there is nobody that you want more backs against the wall than Nick Saban. Okay, I get that. But Saban, even after becoming the first SEC team to start 12-0 in consecutive seasons since the Gerald Ford administration, 1974, is staring at 0 SEC titles going into year 5. There's a lot of history and data that kind of backs up. If you haven't gotten there by year 5, you're probably not going to get there. And it's not that he's got everybody in Alabama saying he can't win the big one. But remember, this is someone who was paid that record-setting $4 million contract, the $4 million man, at a time when that contract was so insane, and it kind of set the tone for SEC contracts that followed, the buyout era, all of it. And at that time, if you're thinking, man, is he worth the money? This all of a sudden takes on 2024 Ryan Day vibes. And that's instead how we view the first part of Nick Saban's tenure if he had lost this game and if he had been 0-2 against Florida to that point.
I think 2011 was the real hinge. They got over the hump here. I already said that. But in terms of him being bulletproof to Alabama fans,
Yeah.
you think about his quality of life. Okay. Post 2011, I think was when it was really good because until then he was chasing. I say that to say we talked about Miss Terry and the influence that she had. How is their life in Tuscaloosa different if you don't win the SEC? If Tim Tebow gets to, claim this crown, all this different stuff, does Nick Saban kind of burn out at Alabama in that same way? Because that's what was so beautiful about the Saban thing from an Alabama standpoint. After 2011, no matter what happened, you knew he was not on the hot seat. He was probably going to figure it out. Even if he didn't, fans were going to love him forever. It was such a unique situation in modern college football. You just talked about, Ryan Day, where fans are at his throat, despite his role, in the previous team, like the previous Ohio State regime, right? And so that being said, I think those two teams, 2009 and 2011, are why Nick Saban was at Alabama for as long as he was, because he knew he could only fall but so far. It allowed him to take risks like hiring Lane Kiffin.
Yeah.
It allowed him to innovate in those ways, not because his back was against the wall, but because he wanted to adapt and get ahead of guys, And I think that's a totally different style of adaptation when, okay, you have house money. Now I'm going to bet a little bit more because I have it and it doesn't matter. And if I miss, I miss, Sometimes you miss with like a Blake Sims. Okay, that's fine. But that being said, when you have those bona fides and no one's questioning you, it's so different. So I think Saban could have also burned himself out, to your point, in the next couple of years there, hearing the jeers from different fan bases, having the Alabama fan base, the one that was so on his side, start to turn against him. Maybe he goes into this great broadcasting career. Maybe he tries the NFL again. Maybe he goes
Texas.
Texas would have been that would have been right there. That's a really good point. So yeah, that's we look back at it and it's all obvious, but nothing about what Nick Saban did is easy or expected or regular, right?
It was before a time in which Bama was inevitable. This is the beginning of Bama establishing this inevitability. And really, you could say 2010, still, Bama was not inevitable yet because that team was supposed to dominate and it was supposed to repeat, and that didn't end up happening. But yeah, I mean, it could go in a bunch of different ways, and you just don't know how those devastating losses are going to impact you. Urban was considered easily the number one coach in college football at this time. And 3 weeks after this game, this devastating loss, his first loss in 14 months, and he's like, I'm out. I'm done. You just never know with these losses. So I think it's fascinating with Saban.
And you could see how quickly my mind moved to the slander about Colt McCoy, because I remember holding on to that hopium at the time. Colt McCoy was healthy. Maybe you don't win this game. That's why 2011 slammed the door, because I was the exact affected party there. I was at both of those games in 2011. I remember leaving the Superdome in 2011 and me and my stepdad sitting on the dock by the bay, watching the tide roll away and just going, this is it. This is going to be the rest of my life. I hate this so much. And so having the one championship against injured Colt McCoy, coming back, winning in 2011 in a dominant fashion, I think that was the real switch for Saban, overcoming 2010, as you mentioned.
I think Bama beats Texas, even if Colt McCoy's healthy. Is that a bold take?
Hey, don't tell that to 2009 me, buddy, because that's all I had at that point in time. It was quickly taken from me.
Yep. All right. The player image we'll always remember when thinking of this game. It's the most obvious answer I think we've ever had for this category. It's the Tebow tears, and it's not close. We've waited this long to get to it. Will, I have a take on this.
Yeah. And look at your screen on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube,
Yeah.
we're just sitting on Tim Tebow's face here. Don't want to put his face on blast, but you can kind of fill in the rest with your mind.
Phrasing on that one. At that time, Tebow is the butt of the joke. And if you're an anti-Tebow guy like my older fraternity brothers were, there was just gasoline on the fire. The takes fire that came as a result of this, where they were showing that image in the stadium too, at the Georgia Dome. You talk about like going rogue with the Carlos Dunlap sign. They were showing this too a lot. And I think we probably treat this a little bit differently now. And here's what I mean by that. Tebow probably still has plenty of detractors. Everything is divisive now. He probably has a certain amount of people that are going to skewer him no matter what happens. I also think we probably leave this game with a different sort of appreciation for him showing that passion at the end, of showing what this meant to him. Like if Fernando Mendoza, for example, who had a different build up to his career than Tebow, like I acknowledge that. But if he had been crying his eyes out on the sideline of the national championship as Miami is, kneeling out the final seconds of it, he's probably getting praised for it. And it's probably not something that he's getting dogged on. Like you're just not ripping him to shreds for crying in this moment. You're seeing, oh my God, we're at a time right now where all we're talking about in college football is legacy. And, oh, these guys, like, it doesn't matter what school they go to and blah, blah, blah. And, I just wish that the name on the front of the jersey mattered to these guys. And for Tebow, obviously it meant everything. And that was so well known. This was also at a time in which Tebow had been put on this unrealistically high pedestal, and understandably so. So I do think that it just would have been talked about differently, knowing how open we are now to athletes expressing themselves. This is at a time in which that's not really out in the forefront in that sort of way. And you got this feeling that the CBS camera crew knew it was going to happen. The second that Tebow is kneeling, not doing the Tebow, but the second that he's kneeling on his sideline.
A version of the Tebow, the sad Tebow.
Kind of, yeah. It really was. And like, guys, we are locking in it. There is a camera that will not be leaving Tim Tebow at this point. And I'm kind of surprised it didn't happen even earlier. That is the Tebow tears. It took until there's 62 seconds left in this game, and Bama is, kneeling out the final seconds of this for him to actually have this rush of emotion. And I do wonder if Tebow, at the back of his mind, is still thinking, we can come back, when everybody knew for the really final 10 minutes of this game, this is over and Florida's no chance to come back. But the funny thing is too, the first shot after this, where you have one of the Pouncey twins, I think it was Marquise, that was consoling him. The first shot after this is Mark Ingram and Julio Jones trolling Florida with Gator Chomp. And Vern had this weird message right before about how classy Alabama was being for kneeling it out and how some coaches in the conference wouldn't do that.
What do you think he was talking about there, by the way?
I was trying to figure that out. Was he talking about Urban?
Low key, I thought it was Urban. I don't know who was seen as like dirty way back then, but yeah, I mean, like the guys associated with that, like Fulmer was already gone and stuff. Maybe trolling Urban there would have been such a weird move. Yeah.
Vern said it with some vigor. Like
he had somebody in mind for sure. Yeah.
He definitely had some money in mind. I don't know who exactly he was referring to, but I mean, the shot itself was just, it's an iconic part of SEC history. And fair or not to someone who is one of the best players that college football has ever known, you cannot forget Tebow tears.
You can't. I think this is, like you said, one of the most iconic images. It's burned into our minds, right? I'm going to give you just a couple of different touch points here that are a little bit more modern and get your take on this. So, well, first, let me ask you, I mean, knowing how much of Tim Tebow's life was on camera, even back then without social media, knowing that, the speech is on the wall, all this different stuff, he had to know he was on television for this.
Yeah. I would assume so. He was still crying in the post game too with Tracy Wolfson. He knew he was being televised, but I don't think he had total control. Are you asking, do you think he was forcing the tears out?
I think he was crying. What I want to juxtapose it with is, remember the shot of Caleb Williams hugging his mom where he's covering himself with the like play sheet or whatever because he knows he's on TV.
Easy.
And
yeah.
And but mind you, I started to be like, oh, this was a point in time. Look how far mental health has come. Da, da, da. Caleb Williams just faced the same thing. He just faced the same thing for crying on national television, and he did everything he could to hold it and look away from the camera, and the cameras followed him around. So as much as I'd like to say, like, oh, back in the day, guys were tougher, I would almost look at Tebow and be like, why didn't you just turn around? Like, you could have just not been this meme. Just get the two Pouncies to kind of be your bodyguards and just turn around. And if you need to cry or go into the tent and like kind of do an injury type thing, like, because it's not like he's doing it like productively or anything. So that's my only take, is he had to know this was going to be famous forever.
So you're telling Tebow to shun his tears? Men don't cry.
I mean, just do what Caleb Williams did. Just look away, because I like, this was too perfect. It was too, if you're going to lose, the tears are crying. I don't know if you've ever been like, where you feel like you're about to cry. Like me, I'm running. I'm getting away from everyone. I'm like, get out of my face, without, people on camera. So I don't know. Maybe he was just overcome with emotion. I think it would be a good thing to ask him. Not calling him like he set it up or anything. It just feels like he probably should have known, if that makes sense.
I think he knew and didn't care. I
Right.
think if there's a guy that is not cared about public perception, social norms, and stuff like that, it is Tebow. And he's as comfortable in his own skin as anybody you'll ever meet. He is strong in his convictions. I don't think that necessarily crossed his mind in the same sort of way of, oh man, I'm about to become a meme and this is going to become this iconic image. This is, oh my God, like my college career is ending in the way that I didn't even allow that to think that was a possibility up until this moment. And it's just all hitting him at that time. I think it's a genuine moment. I think to ask of him to try and like peel away from the crowd to try and protect his, like, I don't think he's thinking necessarily that way. Maybe it's a little bit different if he's approaching this as a 39-year-old guy now and he's like, oh man, I'm probably going to get ripped for this. He's a little bit more aware of kind of the social media imprint and stuff like that. But no, I don't think that would have factored into his mind.
It's a fascinating moment for sure. And I'll say, initially I was like, okay, this was the last guy. Weirdly, I think Caitlin Clark. It's just him and Caitlin Clark, and there's nothing in between of like a monolith that can get people talking, can get people go out to the games. I think this was the last one, but until I thought about it for like a long minute, because I was like, was this the last college athlete like this that could draw a crowd like this? That's a monolith. And again, cultural war stuff, all this versus that. But yeah, I think that this ultimately shows how we haven't changed that much. Now that I think about the Caleb Williams stuff, now that I think about some of the coverage that Caitlin Clark has gotten, where this was definitely a freeze frame in time where, making fun of guys crying was like at an all-time high. This was Xbox Live chat central right here. If you were some dude sitting on your couch, Tebow, like I said about Kirby, like, it was very easy. And dude, the memes I found of this when I was looking for this photo were so bad and not funny, but just putting up the image made dudes laugh at the time.
Adam Morrison famously dragged for crying after the blown lead against UCLA in the NCAA tournament.
That's a good one.
His defining moment right around this era as well. It's more acceptable in college basketball for whatever reason. If you watch One Shining Moment every year, there's tears. It's not just the Villanova flute girl that's crying. There's a lot of other tears at the end of it, and we're just kind of okay with it. But because Tebow is considered this godlike figure, he's considered by many not allowed to be able to cry. And honestly, if I'm a Florida fan looking at this moment, I'm like, yes, thank you. Thank you for reacting in this moment. Would it be better if he was just numb and he showed no emotion whatsoever? I want him to be devastated that his team lost this game. I want this to be the type of thing that hurts so badly. I don't want him just saying, yeah, we gave it our best effort and oh well. No, like this was a dream that died on that field because his team was not better. And I've seen, like, he said in Swamp Kings afterwards, it's bittersweet to come back to the swamp, and he wishes that he could look up there and knows that 09 should have been the other national championship added to it. And I've disagreed with him on that. Like it was Bama's time. Florida's time had passed. Maybe they could have done this differently or that differently, whatever. But I still think Bama was the better team from start to finish. And there is a level of pain, though, that you see with him that I think is very real. And I think it should be remembered. Like, I don't think it should be one of these things that, like, I get why it's mocked. I totally do. And we're kind of mocking it by having it as the background here. But I don't think there's anything wrong with it in the current context of how we view athletes.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something which is really fascinating, which is, who's allowed to cry, right? You're right.
Yeah.
Like, I remember at the time, I believe Ingram cried at the Heisman ceremony. And I remember at the time being
Big
like,
time.
do
Good
we
call.
like crying or not? Like, that was
Yeah.
my take at the time. It was the same as you said. Like, winners can cry. If you lose, you can't cry. It's kind of weird. So it's all this stuff, just like the Heisman, crying in sports is a narrative award, folks.
Dude, Michael Jordan balls his eyes out the first time he wins an NBA title. He was inconsolable in those moments. You're right. It is kind of winners get to cry, losers get to get made fun of. That's the way that it works. All right, well, we are 2 It Just Meant Mores in. We have a long list of games that we want to be able to get to. I think we've hinted at going a little bit more retro. We haven't talked about this yet, so this is just for the people. Do we do the Bluegrass Miracle next? Do we do that one?
We'll talk about it off air, Connor.
We'll talk about it off there. All right.
We got a lot
just
left.
know that we
Yeah.
know. There are a lot of games that we will be getting to at some point. Please email us, theogkickoff@gmail.com, if you've got a suggestion. I tweeted out the list of games that we have already done the other day. I don't think at this point there's going to be games that we're going to repeat anytime soon, just because there are so many other games that I want to be able to get to. So just keep that in mind as well. Please email us. Like I said, subscribe to our YouTube channel, The OG Kickoff, on YouTube, and also on Instagram, The OG Kickoff. We have a lot of great clips that are going up there. And please, we'd love for you to be able to follow along. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.